You're the one that let Starlight get away. So how do I know that you're not the leak?
Yeah, so The Boys episode 6 season 4 came out, and the writers of this show are generally twisted mentally. Like, how on earth did you get that scene in your head and pitch it to other adult human beings? And we can't just stop there, the Homelander scene as well is quite crazy. So whoever said the writing of this show went down to the dogs clearly didn't watch the season. So without further ado, we're gonna cover every major story change that happened this episode. So let's go. We saw Butcher dealing with the aftermath of having to take some air and of course cutting off his leg. By the way, we never found out how exactly he cut off his leg with such speed that nobody heard his screams and or cries and noticed that he had disappeared at the same time. We also saw him basically vomit his brains out and it seemed like a blackish blue. Then Becca gives the deepest line of this episode, that simply killing Homelander isn't enough. Killing him means you continue the cycle. And of course they dropped the biggest you kind of twist on us, that a character that we've been following the whole season was never there. So Monkey Stroke Joe, hope you get the reference, never existed. At least anymore. Billy's mind is so far gone that he literally formed a whole human being who he interacted with. I always wondered why nobody ever saw him or how only Butcher interacted with him. Samir never talked to him and he always stood behind Butcher. So from the start we had been given references but we clearly just didn't take them. So just like in You, Monkey is literally the embodiment of Butcher's worst part. A-Train this episode was just losing a constant paranoia of being caught by Sage for being a lie and a leak. He ended up calling for help and had no idea what to do, but he kept his cool. The way, of course, you know. Just a dazzle of OCD. Then later on, we see him get a chance to make an actual save. And get that reaction from that kid who saw him. Inside him, I know he's genuinely living up to the dream that he always told his nephews about. This character really did a number on me this episode. The fact that he's literally a twisted parody of Batman with a weird liking for holes and the whole like of that. Like, he is literally the best detective like Batman, an orphan like Batman, powerless like Batman. Love how Homelander pokes fun at him for not being able to fly. Like Batman! It genuinely just reminds me of those memes on how Batman gets to the same place as the rest of the Justice League while they run and fly. He has to find a creative way to get there. Lastly, he's rich, just like Batman. Except his money comes from making the black community more impoverished than they actually are. And that's why it's dark and twisted. So we see him take Huey to his weird dungeon. And of course Tech Knight sees his heart rate changing, so he knows something's up. So then they get into whatever and Huey gets saved, but obviously this Tech Knight guy, he's clearly messed up. So any sort of pain is pleasure to him. Except the pain of losing money to helpful organizations or movements, so that's how they punish him. And unfortunately for him, he loses his life to his own servant. How sad. Last episode, we literally got to see Huey kill his own father after seeing the effects that Butcher talked about when giving V to people. It just messes them up even more than they already are. We basically saw Huey's dad be both dead and alive, with him losing control and not knowing what to do with himself, so Huey saved him by letting him go. But in reality, he never managed to process his anger, pain and loss. He just jumped straight into work without thinking about himself and ended up basically getting rap. And we saw how that made him crumble when he came clean to Annie, and the look of desperation in his eyes just showed you how broken this guy is. So for the rest of the season, I'm sure we won't see him sticking around for missions, but I'm quite sure he's probably gonna help Frenchie get out of jail and help him process his pain. We saw Firecracker this episode basically figure out Homelander's weakness, the fact that he craves the love only a mother can provide. Because obviously he never had a real mother figure in his life. So she weirdly manages to find out about his cravings, I don't know how she did that, and takes all sorts of drugs to be able to get to the point of satisfying his cravings. And man, the look on Homelander's face is so funny because he genuinely looks like he's excited and surprised. Suddenly, he becomes extremely gentle and loving. From being the guy who was there like, yeah, so you let Starlight go, to You did this for me? So the very fact that she clearly got to his weak side means that she's definitely going to die by the end of the season. But until then, she's going to have Homelander in her back pocket. Or is Homelander going to have her in his... Anyway, someone is going to have someone in their back pocket. Overall, this episode was just a lot. A lot to take in and process. It definitely wasn't as crazy as episode 4 and 5. I'd say it was definitely more character development this time, especially for Huey, Adrian, and Butcher. And at this pace, I don't think they're gonna finish any of the storylines except maybe Sage's.
Are like
But apart from that, W episode. Can't wait for next week's.